Hi, and welcome back to the Employment Hour. We're here with Charles Krugel. He's an attorney in the area of employment law. And I'm here with our co-host, Mr. Jeff Williams. Charles, welcome again.
Thanks.
And you had some questions of Charles in relation to handbooks?
Yes. Tell us why an employer might be interested in having a formal employee handbook.
Well, on the preventive side of human resources, or proactive side, it helps create basically a workplace that has defined expectations of what's expected of an employee, and it also tells the employee about the company itself, what the culture is, and what they can expect from their employer. So there's a mutual benefit to having a handbook, to putting in writing some sort of expectation on both sides, mutual expectations. So and then in that context, it also helps to alleviate workplace conflict and disputes.
Now, what is a good process for collecting the information you want in there? Let's say you're a small company with just a couple top management people. You obviously don't want to be too isolated as far as who's involved in writing it. How do you go about pulling the information from a variety of people in the company to make sure you're really getting a good breadth in what you're including in there?
That's what I call strategic human resources. You're defining what human resources itself, or what human capital is to the company. What do you want the company to be, and what do you want the company to be to employees? I mean, obviously the bottom line is you're making money, you're making a profit. Well, how are you going to do that? By maximizing the value of employees. And then you look at the jobs themselves, what the company's doing. If it's like an auto manufacturer, you're going to want to have streamlined employment or lean employment manufacturing processes. And you're going to want well-trained people. You're going to want people spaced out or in positions so that there's safety is instilled, and that safety becomes a focus, so people aren't missing work. They're not off leave because of injury or poor workplace safety practices, things like that. It's largely an analytical process. For some companies that are more entrepreneurial in their philosophy, that could be difficult. But then again, not everything has to be in writing either. So I mean, a larger company, you may want more in writing. A smaller company or a company that's more entrepreneurial may be better to put less in writing and just communicate certain expectations, culture, things like that.
In orally.
Private instant messaging isn't private. Voicemail isn't necessarily private. It extends even in cases to the parking lot or company-owned equipment.
I think that's very
orally,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right. This work is a backup for the employer in terms of when an employee really has done something against the rules or whatever, that then he can refer to the handbook and say, well, this was written on our handbook and this and that and whatever?
It could, yeah. It could also work against the employer if the handbook itself is it creates a contract. It's so narrow in focus or in nature that it basically creates a contract that, again, diminishes the impact of employment and will. And in some cases, you could even write, employment and will, but yet the provisions of the contract, actions speak louder than words. And if you treat them as if they're a contractual employee, that may still diminish or even negate the idea of employment and will.
Is it good for them to have an attorney look at the handbook as they're setting it up and making sure that they don't create a contract out of it that they don't want?
To not only so they're not creating a contract, but also make sure that they're not discriminating against any protected classes, that they're not discriminating potentially on the basis of union or concerted any sort of protected activity or protected communications in the workplace. I mean, obviously, the First Amendment doesn't necessarily apply in the workplace because employees don't have freedom of speech.
That's true. And I think that's an important point for people that are being employed, that they really don't have that. When you're at the the site of employment, you kind of have to go along with the corporate line. You have to kind of represent the corporation, and you can't really just say whatever you want.
Not only verbally, but also electronically and in writing too. It applies across any form of communication, body language also.
Yes, and emails really are not private in a corporation. Yes,
emails aren't
very important for people these days. How does the handbook fit in with documentation on a job? What's the whole issue of documentation?
Well, the handbook could create the basis itself for what you document, what would be documented, and how it's going to be documented. And it helps create the basis for that, along with the culture. A more bureaucratic culture will have a more detailed handbook and then also more detailed documentation. So if you're going to have, and documentation itself could be paramount in terms of insulating, for a company to insulate itself from liability should an employment or labor action be brought against them.
Now, when you say documentation, can you kind of define that for our average listener?
Yeah, it could be you're documenting generally performance and conduct or behavior in a workplace. Those are the two basic things that are being documented, performance and conduct. You're documenting their employment history, their wage, salary history, their benefits, promotions, demotions, disciplinary actions, pretty much everything that happens in the workplace.
I see. Can you tell us a little bit about the seminars that you've given? I know you've given a lot of different types of seminars. What kind do you give and to what audiences?
The seminars are largely, in a sense, almost what we're doing right now, sort of Q&A, and they're to business people, business owners who are basically looking to learn more about human resource, preventive and proactive human resources, and also the legal side of it, what it means to actually face a government agency, a regulatory agency like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or National Labor Relations Board, or what it means to go to court. They have to litigate an employment matter, how to negotiate employment contracts or collective bargaining agreements, things like that. So it largely deals with the gamut of labor and employment related issues.
What's the most common seminar question you're receiving from employers?
We've covered a lot of that here actually. Employment at will, how do you discharge somebody, documentation, issues like that. How much do you document? It always comes up, quality over quantity in terms of documentation, and it's impossible to really document everything. Something's always left out for the most part, even in contracts. I mean, as far as I know, there's no such thing as a absolute impenetrable contract.
Yeah, I was taking pictures of weddings one time. I had a family that owned a construction business, and the man he says he never had contracts. And I said, well, what are you talking about? You have to have a contract. He says, no, if you can't look in the guy in the eye across the table, if you can't shake his hand and know you've got somebody who's really going to be an ally to you, he said any contract in the world would not hold it and whatever. However, it's good to have contracts. Am I right?
To an extent, but I agree with this. I agree with this relative. Is that?
No, it was an acquaintance at a wedding that I was photographing.
Yeah, I'm a solo practitioner, so I go with that too. I have handshake agreements with some of my clients. As long as they pay on time, everything is cool. That's it. I have a longer agreement that sets out things, but to some people they find it intimidating, and sometimes they just do an agreement by email, saying email back saying yes, you agree that this is what you'll pay me, and it works fine like that too. I agree. You want to be able to look people in the eye and do and via handshake basically be able to work. It's a lot more efficient that way, and you get to concentrate on actual operations as opposed to the personalities involved and all these other issues that tend to play into the business.
Now we have a bit more time. What do you think the market is for people that are starting their own business at this time and this day and age? You think that this is a good climate for that, or you think they should hold off?
It's always a good climate to start a business if you're a good business person. If you know what you're doing, if you know how to sell, you know how to market yourself, it's always a good climate. It's tough, I think, in terms of the gap right now for people going to work, the gap between the higher salary, higher wage people and the lower and middle. The middle shrinking, it seems. So in that market, it may be tough. We're still in the process of transforming over to a more service-based economy, more retail-based service, or what they call McJobs, whatever. Not to slander or not to put down McDonald's, but that's become the vernacular. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, it's tough. But always for entrepreneurial people who are good at selling and marketing themselves, it's always a good climate.
Okay, we just have a little bit of time left. Can you tell us when should he know that he should be hiring somebody such as yourself, an employment lawyer?
Well, anytime you want to start documenting what's going on in the workplace, you want handbooks or policies, is a good time. Anytime you start getting wind of the union knocking on the door or employees trying to organize themselves into a collective, that would be a good time. Or anytime you start getting complaints of harassment, discrimination, those types of matters, and then of course the obvious is complaints from regulatory agencies or lawsuits.
Mm-hmm. And probably earlier than later, you really should get into thinking about the law and what the laws are and having some consultation on that. Am I correct?
I think proactive and preventive human resources is always cheaper than reactive. meaning legal representation on the lawsuit or complaint side, or on the union avoidance or negotiation side. It's
Okay,
always
we're out of time in this segment, and Charles Krugel, thank you so much for being with us. It's been very, very informative. And for you, our listeners, check out our website, www.employmenthour.com. We have some things on there from Charles Krugel, and you could contact him through our website. We'll be back in a moment.